React 19.2 was released, and it's exactly the kind of release you would expect from a minor new version, which it is. Nothing groundbreaking, but a couple of nice quality of life improvements or niche new features which you will not necessarily use in all your future apps. And speaking of that, the question is how many of these features will make it into new or existing apps anyway, since of course AI won't really know about them. But let's get into what's new and what changed. So React 19.2, and I have the official announcement blog post open here, which I'll of course also link below the video in case you want to read all about that new version. And the most exciting new feature, in my opinion, is the first one they mention here in this blog post. Either because its name starts with A or because the React team also thinks it's the most exciting new feature. It's the new activity component. And the idea behind this new activity component is that you get an alternative new way of rendering content conditionally. And you might wonder, why do we need a new way? I mean, rendering content conditionally has obviously been possible since the very first version of React, and it's rather straightforward. You could do it like this. They even show you here in the official blog post. You could use a variable or a condition and then just render some component or some JSX content conditionally. So that's how you always did it, and spoiler, that's likely how you will do it in the future in most cases too. But with React 19.2, you now got an alternative, the new activity component. And the idea here is that with this component here, you have a mode prop on this new activity component, which is built into React. And you can set this mode prop to visible or hidden, though they mentioned in the blog post that they want to support other modes in the future too for advanced or different use cases. But right now it's either visible or hidden, two hard-coded string values that you can set as values for the mode prop on the activity component. And of course, you could derive the value you're setting based on some condition or on some variable that stores the results of some check. So true or false variable. So instead of the old approach, you could use activity. Now, why would you do that? Well, the difference is when you use this activity component, the content between the activity component tags, which could be any JSX code you want, which could be a bunch of components you wrote or just one component or anything else, that content is technically being rendered. It's technically being executed. So if you have a component there, like the page component in their example here, that is going to get rendered. That code in the page component is going to get executed, whereas with the old approach, it's only going to get executed once the condition is met. So once is visible is true in this example here. With the activity component, it's always going to get rendered and executed no matter what is visible is, no matter what the mode is set to. So what's the purpose then? I mean, the idea behind conditionally rendering is that you don't want to always render it. Well, it is going to get rendered, but kind of behind the scenes. It's not going to be visible on the page if the mode is set to hidden. So React will make sure that the JSX code, the component you have there, for example, gets executed, but it will make sure that it's not visible on the page. It will also not execute any effects in that component. Activity will block this. The activity component will block this. So it is a way of kind of pre-rendering component or JSX code. If you know that it's likely a user will navigate to some page or click a button that will eventually lead to some content being revealed, but it's not happened yet, you might want to pre-render that about to be active content. And that's exactly what activity allows you to do. And that is the core idea behind it. It is a new component that allows you to kind of pre-render or prepare a component or JSX code to become visible in the future without making it visible yet and without executing its effect. So that can be useful. Again, the question is, since AI doesn't know anything about that, and your colleagues likely also don't, and most projects, of course, all projects, since we didn't have another option, use that old approach for conditional rendering, activity might be nice. It might be a nice optimization in cases where you have some expensive, big component that's about to be rendered, but you'll likely not use it all the time for all your conditional code. And that's also not necessarily the idea behind it. So it can be a nice optimization, a nice performance tweak you can implement in some apps. Now, useEffectEvent is another new feature introduced by React 19.2, and that is a new hook. Now, we have a lot of hooks in React already. Obviously, you can also build your own, but there are a bunch of built-in hooks. And this new hook, useEffectEvent, is essentially the React team admitting that the useEffect hook is kind of broken or too difficult to use. I mean, there is an official article in the docs that tells us that we might not need useEffect, and useEffect is indeed getting used wrong a lot. And if you're using AI for generating code, which I guess most of us are, then you will get plenty of examples for wrong useEffect usage. And I don't mean wrong in the technical sense necessarily, though that can also happen, but I mean situations where you don't need it. Now, in situations where you do need it, you can still mess up or write unnecessarily complex code. And we find an example for unnecessarily complex code here in that blog post. Here we have kind of a made-up example where we want to show a notification whenever a user connects to a chat room. So whenever a chat room component gets rendered or the room ID changes. But since in this example, we also rely on some other state, in this case, some theme that might be changing, we right now, previously to React 19.2, need to include that theme state variable in our dependencies array for useEffect. Now, when I say need, you could omit it. You could omit it, and if you're not using linting, you will be fine. If you do use linting, you will need to disable the linter for this effect, because otherwise it will yell at you. But technically correct would be to include it, because you should include all state variables you're using in an effect in its dependency array. The problem is that, of course, this would show the connected notification in this example here whenever the theme changes, which makes no sense, because just because the user changed the theme doesn't mean that they reconnected to a chat room. It makes sense to show that notification when the component renders or the room ID changed, but not when the theme or some other state that might be used in there changes. However, in order to be technically correct with useEffect, you would need to include all those state variables, or work against React, disable the linting and so on, and avoid adding that variable. That would be the hack you would have to use in the past. Now, with useEffectEvent, with that new hook, you got a cleaner way of working around this problem, because essentially useEffectEvent is a new hook you should use to wrap the code that should be triggered in response to an event, like the user changing the chat room ID or connecting to a chat room for the first time. So whenever you have some code that has this event-like character, which should execute when something changes, something happens, you could use useEffectEvent to wrap that code if, and that's important, if that event is in the end triggered by an effect, like a component being loaded or some state variable changing. If the event is triggered upon a click, you should not use this hook. You should just use an event handler function like you always did. And to be very honest, in many situations, you can avoid using useEffect by just putting the code that needs to change due to an event in the event handler function. It is an anti-pattern that you will see in a lot of AI-generated apps, that people use an event handler function to change some state and then set up a useEffect hook to change more state or do something else after that state changed, but just put it all in the same event handler and you'll be fine. So in many cases, you can avoid useEffect. If you can't avoid it though, and you have this event-like code, then you can use the useEffectEvent code because this new hook has the advantage that you don't need to add a dependencies array and you'll still not get linting errors. So here in this official example, in their blog post, you see useEffectEvent being used, the theme state variable or prop variable here, which is certainly state and some other component, is being used, and yet there is no dependencies array here. That is the difference. And then you can use this value that's returned by useEffectEvent, this onConnected function in this case here, and use that in your main effect, and there you don't need to add it to the dependencies array, just like you don't need to add set state calls in the dependencies array of a useEffect function. I know it is really like around 5 corners, and that is the problem we have with React's useEffect hook. Using it correctly is unnecessarily complex because you have to work your way around a couple of potential problems. Again, in many cases, you can just avoid it by avoiding useEffect, which is always a good idea. But if you need it, and you have this event-like character, and you depend on some state or prop that isn't related to triggering that event, like that theme prop here, then useEffectEvent can be your solution. Let's be honest, I don't think that is going to be used in many apps because it is still pretty complex. AI doesn't know about it. Your colleagues might not know about it. And as I mentioned, in many cases, the cleaner solution is just to see if you can maybe avoid using useEffect altogether. But you have it if you need it. Now, cache signal is a new feature you will likely not use because it is related to React server component and components. And let's be honest, React server components are kind of cool, but we all use them basically in our Next.js apps, and we rely on Next.js taking care of the caching and so on. Now, if you really would be super low level, deeply into your Next.js app and looking for optimizations and manually caching stuff through React's Cache API, which does exist in conjunction with React server components, you could use cache signal. Again, super niche. You have it if you need it. You will likely not need it, I think. Now, React 19.2 got more. For example, performance tracks is a new feature, which is not something related to code you would write in your React app, but instead a new feature related to Chrome DevTools, which gives you more ways of digging into how your React app performs with help of the Chrome DevTools. So obviously that can be interesting. And we got a partial pre-rendering feature, which is also a feature you'll likely not use like some of the other features before, as you saw in this video, because essentially this would allow you to write your own script, your own code that runs during the build process, for example, to pre-render your React app so that you have like a statically pre-rendered React app, statically pre-rendered HTML code, which you could save in files and serve to your users. And you can partially pre-render by essentially aborting that pre-rendering process. For example, once you would need to fetch data from a database or from a remote server, so that you only have the shell pre-rendered, only the HTML content that doesn't rely on that data. Then you abort the pre-rendering process with help of that abort signal you can pass to that pre-render function that's provided by React. And you would then have your currently pre-rendered content, which you could save on a CDN, for example, to serve it to your users. You would have the state as it exists at the point of time where your pre-rendering stops. You could save that too. And then when your app runs, you could fetch that pre-rendered state and resume rendering essentially now with the dynamic data once it's available or once you're ready to fetch it. And as you can tell, again, this is likely a feature that could be interesting for frameworks that want to do optimization for you. If you're building your own super complex, manually fine-tuned, controlled React app, that might be interesting for you too. For most of us, this likely isn't. Then we got a couple of bug fixes, but as you can tell by the way I presented this, by the way I shared these new features, activity, this new activity component, in my opinion, is the most useful new feature you'll likely use in some situations. useEffectEvent is a good savior, a good solution for problems you might be facing, but it's not necessarily the best solution to many use effect related problems you might be facing. And the other features are pretty niche and likely not something you'll be using all the time. So that's React 19.2. Again, one problem will be that AI doesn't know anything about these new features, so you will have to manually feed that blog post or the official docs into your cursor chat, for example, to make it aware of that if you wanted to be able to use these features. Otherwise, you'll have to do it manually. That is some old school feeling. Anyways, hope this was helpful, and maybe see you in future videos. Bye.